Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching us tonight. The network news versus the factor. That is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. So let me set this up for you. All the surveys show that Americans depend on TV news for vital information. Newspapers and magazines have lost a lot of influence, and the internet does not provide in-depth reporting or analysis. It is a headline service. So for better or for worse, Americans are dependent on national news broadcasts for information. Enter Tom Brokaw, the former anchorman of the NBC Nightly News. Mr. Brokaw is a first-rate journalist, but does see things through a liberal prism. Recently, he gave a talk here in New York City where he cited the nightly news broadcasts.
That audience is so much more substantial than most people realize. When I talk to audiences, I say, how many of you think that Bill O'Reilly is the most popular guy in news? And they'll all raise their hands. I say, Bill O'Reilly would finish dead last if he were in the evening news.
Dead last? Really? Me? Mr. Brokaw is correct that the nightly news has a larger audience than cable news. How could it not? The three broadcast networks are on all television sets in America with low dial positions. Fox News Channel you have to pay for. And we are on channel 761 out on Long Island where I live. You have to hunt for us. And thank God you do. Also, the factor is in prime time, up against the Big Bang Theory, American Idol, football, stuff like that. Competition for viewers is brutal. At the dinner hour, when the net news is on, not so brutal. Nevertheless, we average here between 4 and 5 million viewers a night when you add the 8 and 11 broadcasts together. Now, the important stuff. We asked Mr. Brokaw to appear this evening. He declined. He has never been on the factor because he knows that we know he has an agenda. And that agenda is power. Since the rise of cable news, the network news has lost a lot of influence. When was the last time you saw a discussion about a nightly news story on the net? Here on The Factor, we're the center of discussion on the internet nearly every night. In fact, the most powerful network broadcast is not the nightly news, it's 60 Minutes. One caveat, network news reporters generally very strong, but it is the presentation that should concern alert Americans. For example, the website Newsbusters analyzed coverage of the Benghazi revelations last week, which were very important, as opposed to Michelle Obama's 50th birthday. They found that the First Lady's celebration was given twice as much airtime as the Benghazi story by the three networks. That's the crux of the matter. Exclusion of stories the nets don't like, even if they're important. Without cable news, Americans would not be getting vital information. Look, I worked for CBS and ABC News. I know the gatekeepers there select stories based upon a variety of factors. I also know that the network news broadcasts are pretty much the same on every channel. They don't provide much analysis or perspective, and all three networks lean left. Tom Brokaw should be happy, overjoyed, thrilled that cable news and the factor exist. He should be running us down. He should be amazed that we are so successful because we provide a voice you would never hear on the network news. And that's a memo. Now for the top story tonight, what about the power aspect of TV news? Joining us from Washington, Charles Krauthammer, author of the big bestseller, Things That Matter. So does this matter, Charles, this topic?
Well, not as much as my book, but it still does matter. Look, I think what's happened is that the keepers of the networks, who for one generation, almost two, had a total monopoly on the news. You had only three choices, and they were essentially ideologically all the same. They don't like the fact that they no longer have a monopoly. I've been saying this for 10 years, that the genius of Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes in creating Fox News is to have discovered a niche audience in American broadcast news, namely half the country. Everybody knows that the network news all give it from the same perspective, and what Fox News has offered is a new way to look at the news, and that's why it has been so unbelievably successful, and why there's some resentment from the mainstream media, because they no longer control the agenda.
But it's more than that. It's a power thing. And when Brokaw, Jennings, and Rather were in the chair, okay, when they were the anchormen, they had all the power. No one had any power but them. And then once in a while, there would be a commentator put on there, Eric Severide, someplace else. He had a little power, but not much. Now, there is no power at the network news, really. The anchormen are good, they're professional and all of that, but they don't drive the national debate. They don't change things like Jessica's Law. They don't do anything like that. Correct?
Look, I think, in fact, they know that, A, there's been a fragmentation. People go to other sources of news far more than they did, which is why the ratings of the evening news on the nets is so disastrously lower than it was a generation ago. But apart from that, I think they also have this sneaking knowledge, which they don't want to acknowledge because it is sort of against their own pride, of the quality of some of the cable news. I would argue that the flagship evening news show on Fox, Brett the Bear's show, Special Report, on which I happened to appear, but you could cut out the second half hour. Just look at the hard news stuff in the first half hour, is, I would say, the best on television. It goes into the weeds. It isn't afraid to do stuff that is not that popular. The stuff that was done on health care reform long before anyone else reported it, and which now everybody has discovered, like the cancellation of policies, the inflation of the premiums. All that was reported months ago on Fox and nowhere else. So I think they understand, and they pretend, A, to be non-ideological, which is not true, and also to be superior in their coverage, which is also not true. That is quite a blow, so I can understand the reaction.
Okay, but Brokaw's out of the game. Now he's retired. He just does some special stuff for NBC. But here's the bottom line on this. Charles Krauthammer and Bill O'Reilly would never be able to appear on the nightly news, on any of the networks. I don't believe that we would. Maybe now that we're so successful, maybe they would, but certainly when we were working our way up, there's no way. So why doesn't Brokaw celebrate that? You know, I mean, why doesn't he want more information flow in the marketplace? Last word on this.
Well, that is where I find it rather odd. People lament, and they say, oh, in the old days where we all could rely on a source of news. In the old days, it all came from one ideological perspective. Right. Why don't they celebrate the fact that in a democracy, you now have a level of pluralism that you never had before, and why don't you say that it's a great thing? Let everybody speak, as Mao would say, let 1,000 flowers bloom. You know, I'd appeal, Mao would be the right kind of source for this kind of news. And why not celebrate that? So I think there's, you know, here are people who control the game, they no longer control it, and they're not that happy about it.
Yeah,
that's human nature.
They're not good losers, but we have to say that the network news does have a substantial audience, and we respect what they do most of the time. All right, now we're going to hold Charles over for